sign of God on earth. You remember, you may remember that there was a question asked of Shoghi Effendi. It was published in the book of Isaiah. It says, a little child shall lead them. And the guardian was asked who the child was. And he said himself. He is the child of the covenant. And not only the covenant of Baha'u'llah, but the mighty covenant of Abraham and his seed forever. Did you realize that too? You remember in the book of Genesis, the beginning of the Bible, where Sarah could have no children, and she brought Haggai, the handmaid, to Abraham, and to Haggai was born Ishmael. And then when she was 100 years old, she was said she would have a child, and Isaac was born. And Isaac, Ishmael is the lineage that goes to Muhammad. And from Muhammad, of course, Bob wore the green turban and was of the direct lineage from Muhammad. Then Isaac is the lineage that goes to Jesus Christ, and no continuity from them. And then you'll read in the 25th chapter of the book of Genesis, the first verse, where Abraham took another wife, Keturah. And from the lineage of Keturah, through, well, a long line is given there, to Baha'u'llah. And of course, Baha'u'llah had a son, Abdul-Baha. And Abdul-Baha had a daughter, Daiya. And then it was Daiya who married to Mirza Hadi. And the union of these two, of the union of the twin holy seas, as Abdul-Baha says in the Will and Testament, the firstborn is the guardian of the faith, Shoghi Effendi, and he has no children, no heirs, no continuity. And so he is the child also of that mighty covenant of Abraham and his seed forever. But now we don't have any guardian, but we do have the God-given institution of Baha'u'llah permanently in the earth, the universal house of justice. As Baha'u'llah calls it, the most great infallibility.
But also talking of that child, as far back as 1897, Abdul-Baha was asked, and his reply was, O maid servant of God, verily that child is born and is alive, and from him will appear wondrous things that thou wilt hear of in the future. Thou shalt behold him endowed with the most perfect performance, perfect appearance, supreme capacity, absolute perfection, consummate power, and unsurpassed might. His face will shine with a radiance that illumines all the horizons of the world. Therefore, forget this not as long as thou dost live, inasmuch as ages and centuries will bear trace of him. That is the year that Shoghi Effendi was born. So Abdul-Baha already knew who was to be the future guardian of the faith, even that child as a babe. And you know, one time there was one of the Bahá'ís in the house of Abdullah Pasha, and he said to Abdul-Baha, Abdul-Baha, who will lead the world after you leave us? And Abdul-Baha said, That is a well-guarded secret. And just at that time, there was quite a number of small children running across the courtyard. And Abdul Baha said to this pilgrim, "I don't think you've met my son Shoghi Effendi, have you? My grandson." And he called Shoghi Effendi and introduced him to this pilgrim. After the passing of Abdul Baha, this pilgrim realised that Abdul Baha had answered his question.
When it came to 1953 and the fourth great world conference that took, international conference that took place at the beginning of that 10-year crusade, it was held in New Delhi. And we had planned to go there. So we cabled the Guardian. He had said, because pilgrimage had been closed as a result of the turmoil that was in Israel, had been closed. And then he said to cable, he announced it was open and anyone wishing to go was to cable. So we cabled the Guardian for permission to come to Haifa before the conference in New Delhi. And his reply was, just simply apply after conference. So we again made our schedule. We travelled on a boat to India actually, and from Australia, and then applied to after that we would could arrive in Haifa on the 25th of October 1953. And his cabled reply was, approved, Shoghi. Just one word, approved, addressed to us. And that was one of the thrills that we had in leaving India and flying direct from India, direct to Tel Aviv in those days. We were on the last flight that was flying direct. After that, flights were not permitted to cross Arab territory any more than they do now. They don't cross over Arab countries direct into Israel. And we had the bounty then of going into Israel, coming up to Haifa, and going to the Eastern Pilgrim House, and there to be met by, Western Pilgrim House, to be met by Jesse Revell in our first instance, and Jesse introduced us to Western Pilgrim House.
And just at that time, Rahia Khanum was walking across the hall, and she said, "Oh, Madge and Collis, welcome. We're so glad you could hear." Madge and Collis, as though she'd known us all our life, we'd never met her.
Used her first name.
We felt home.
She used our first names. Well, it was the custom in that time for the last pilgrims to arrive to lead Indian file down the stairs into the dining room at 7 o'clock in the evening when there was dinner with Shoghi Effendi. Well, I remember we were sitting up in the lounge, all of us waiting, and then the maid came up and said, "Shoghi Effendi has arrived." And so Madge, you know the Western custom, ladies first, and so she led
This is the one time he was very glad that it was ladies first. He was so nervous. So he was very glad.
You know, have you ever had butterflies in the middle? Well, going to see the sign of God on earth did to me a little bit of butterflies in the middle, you know. And anyway, down we went, and followed by all the other believers, others that that were present at that time, including hands that were present, we all followed down to the dinner table. And then when you went in,
Shoghi Effendi was sitting at the table, say in this position. And as soon as he saw us, he stood up immediately, held out his hand and shook it and said, "Welcome." And then I stepped aside for Collis to greet the beloved guardian. Now the guardian was only 5'1" tall. You know how tall Collis is.
And so Shoghi Effendi took my hand, a firm handshake. He gave me a good handshake, and then he said in quite a pleading voice, he said, "May I greet you Eastern style?"
He didn't say that to me.
So I had to, 1, 2, 3, you know, Persian style. And immediately you felt at home, and then the guardian, as he did each night, he told each pilgrim where to sit at the table. So we were sitting down the table a little bit, and others were up, and I remember it was Josephine Kruger was leaving. That was her last night, and she was leaving for Finland, returning the pioneer for Finland, and she was sitting at the end of the table. And much of the talk and discussion was from Shoghi Effendi to her in Finland. And she must have asked him about changing the words of Baha'u'llah in the writings, because she said, roses, could we change it to an Arctic flower of which the people are all familiar? And the guardian had said, no, we can't change that. But, so we were told this afterwards, but that night he had an envelope there and 2 files of attar of roses. You know the little files, the Persian files? He had 2 of these. And he says, one of these are for you. Now, well, the other one is, you anoint the believers up in there, your area there. You anoint them with this attar of rose. And you take a picture of a rose. You find a picture of a rose. Then they'll understand what a rose is. So the guardian gave an illustration of how she should do it, but you can't change the words of Baha'u'llah. No. So
I think we saw this so many times. And this is a little personal story, but it shows you the love and the humility of the guardian. Our daughter was only 7 years old, and she was very, very persistent that we asked the guardian for his autograph. And we truly felt that this couldn't be possible. But she was so persistent that we felt it was not our duty to say what the guardian would do and what he wouldn't do. And we told Rahir Khanum this at lunchtime. And we said we're going to tell the guardian what our daughter wanted, but we don't think he could do it. Anyway, at the dinner table, Rahir Khanum suddenly says, "Shoghi Effendi, have a guess what Madge and Collis's little girl wants." So he looked at me. So I told him. And he said, "Oh, I think I've got something more precious than that. I think I've got a signature of Abdul Baha." That closed the conversation. But a few nights later, there was an envelope by his side, and Shoghi Effendi always sat in that position, and I was at the head of the table.
commanding the views of the doors that entered the room.
And Rahir Khanum sat next to him. And this night he turned to me. I don't know why he didn't turn to Collis. By the way, Collis was a National Assembly member in those days, not a hand of the court. And Shoghi Effendi said, "I couldn't find the signature of Abdul Baha, but I think I've found something just as important. It's a photocopy of a hidden word, number 19 in the Persian, that Abdu'l-Baha had illumined. It was in sepia colour. So this is what she got. She didn't get the signature. And I'm going, how could he? If he gave it to one, how many thousands would he have to give it to? But you know, the Guardian was only short. And the greatest Holy Leaf said he had the hands of the whole lot. She often referred to that. But the Guardian was so humble. You never heard him say, I. If he was talking of the guardianship, he'd say, the guardian of the Baha'i faith said so and so, or the guardianship is responsible for this, or the guardian does so and so. As though it was somebody entirely away from him himself. And that in those days, everything that a pilgrim did was directed by Shoghi Effendi. There were only 9 at a time, and there were only about 4 Western pilgrims there when we were there. And he said, tomorrow you will attain to the shrines of the Bab and Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha. Because in those days, Western pilgrims did not go to the shrines of an afternoon, because that's when the Persian men met with Shoghi Effendi around the shrine gardens. And so we had not been to the shrines the day we had arrived. And he said, then at 3 o'clock you'll go by car to Bahá'í, and you will sleep 2 nights at Bahá'í. Today I've made it 2 nights instead of 1. And then he said something that I think is very, very beautiful. He said, when you go to the shrines, pray as you feel most comfortable. If you wish to sit, if you wish to stand, stand. If you wish to sit, sit. If you wish to kneel, kneel. If you wish to prostrate yourself, prostrate yourself. But be comfortable. In other words, just because the other fellow does, you don't have to. And I thought that was very, very lovely coming from Shoghi Effendi. Because you know, we Westerners, unless you're Roman Catholic, are not used to really well, even Roman Catholics don't prostrate themselves, they simply kneel in the church.
One of the first things that the Guardian talked about to us was the conference that was held in India, and he wanted to know information about it. We'd just come from that conference, and of how there were several hundreds of people there from many different countries, and the discussion and the call had been made for more pioneers to many of the countries that were still open, of that 131 virgin countries. And there was a committee there that were arranging for pioneers and giving information of the pioneering goals that were to be undertaken at that time. And I know there were some from Australia that already arranged, that Mr. and Mrs. Blom there arranged that they would go then to the Solomon Islands. It was Violet Hernkey who decided that she would then, and that at that time, would go to the Admiralty Islands. These are places named by Abdu'l-Baha. And the Guardian told us that night, he said, Abdu'l-Baha says, and other islands. And he said, I have named them, named other islands, other than what with all the names that are in the divine name of Abdu'l-Baha. And he gave a very wonderful talk and explanation to us of the majesty, the greatness and of the significance of this pioneering effort that was taking place, so historic, that, as Mr. Farutan told us, that the list of the Knights of Baha'u'llah is to be hermetically sealed. The Guardian told us it's a long scroll that was made in Italy, a great long scroll, and it all has little oval pieces in it amongst all the decorative design, and all the names of all the people are in it, except for a few goals still to be filled. And he said that would be hermetically sealed and placed beneath the floor as the threshold of the entrance to the shrine of Baha'u'llah, so that people for ages would know who were the first people to arrive for the building of the kingdom of God on earth in these countries. This was a great, he said, an enormously great station that was to be designated those that arose to serve in a period when it wasn't easy, when they went alone and they started from scratch, started from nothing and no supporters, no one there to welcome them. And they started to build the kingdom of God on earth. Oh, he gave us, and then he told us of how the Dunns, he said, they are true conquerors of Australia. They came, they taught the faith in all states. And then he said, and they stayed and established the faith. And they were responsible for establishing the first National Spiritual Assembly in 1934, the same year as the National Assembly was established in Iran. He then talked about, yes, my wife's reminding, they were the true conquerors of Australia, of a continent. And then he talked about Mr. Lakmani, who was then pioneering in Ceylon, now it's called Sri Lanka. And he talked about him and his station. And then he said, Mr. and Mrs. Faizi, and they are the conquerors of Bahrain Islands. And then he said, not only the Bahrain Islands, but of all Arabia. And it was most interesting to us to see that when Mr. Faizi died, the Universal House of Justice used those words as saying that they were the conquerors of Arabia. Mr. Faizi was regarded by the Guardian as the conqueror of Arabia.
But actually what started that conversation was when we came into the dining room that night, Shoghi Effendi looked radiantly happy. And he turned to us and he said, I've got good news for you. Mrs. Dobbins has arrived in the New Hebrides Islands. He knew that Mrs. Dobbins, along with her husband, was our spiritual parents.
Yes.
And he was so excited that another Knight of Baha'u'llah had arrived in their post. Friends, if you could have just seen his hat. And the workers there in Haifa at that time, they said they'd never seen the Guardian so happy as he was at that period, because the pioneers, the Knights of Baha'u'llah, were getting out into their posts far faster than he had thought possible. So if we want to bring that joy and radiance to the members of the House of Justice, we know what to do.
Action. Yes, action. Then on another night he told us the story, a fantastic story as he told it in detail, of the martyrdom of the Bahá'í, of the collecting of that body and placing it into a little wooden coffin, and how that little wooden coffin was later placed into another bigger coffin, one inside the other. And then he gave the description and the detail of all the places that it went to. Oh, we were seated there from 7 o'clock when dinner started we had dinner, and then must have been a little later he started talking until 10 o'clock that night. And the Guardian telling the story with such detail that it was really exciting. I'd have liked to have had, really loved to have had a tape recorder recording it all with his expressions that he had and the way he used his eyes and his forehead. And he had a black silk, what you call them, Taj? Fez. Black silk fez, flat top. And using his forehead and his eyes were flashing. It'd work up, go up like this. And every now and again the Guardian put his hand up and push it forward down to here.
Collis mentioned that to Maria Carmel a few years ago. She said, "Oh, did you notice that?"
When he talked of Baha'u'llah, believe me, the majesty, whoa, the authority in his voice and the tone, it made the marrow of your bones tingle. I'll tell you, it was moving. It was moving. Well, then he told how finally it was Abdu'l-Baha finally had that coffin brought to Haifa, brought to Akka. He gave the routes by which it would go. And then the very day that it arrived in the house of Abdullah Pasha, that same morning, pilgrims from the Western world arrived to meet Abdu'l-Baha. And the Guardian said Abdu'l-Baha just had time to pick up a carpet and cover the casket within the room. When they entered, it was already there in the room. And
then for the next 10 years, it was in the room of the greatest holy leader.
That coffin was in her room.
And the pilgrims used to wonder why the greatest holy leader was so reverent when she went into her room. Wouldn't you be reverent if you knew the body of the Bath was in the room?
The manifestation was already there in her room.
The well-guarded secret.
Actually, we understood and we were told when I was a pilgrim that it was under her bed, hidden beneath the bed and covered. Then it was in 1909, the 21st of March 1909, and then the Guardian gave and told the story of how that Abdu'l-Baha had by that time building the 6 rooms of what is the present shrine of Baba. And into the vault he'd had the marble sarcophagus made by the Bahá'ís at his request, made by the Bahá'ís of Mandalay in Burma, that had been shipped to Egypt, brought up to Haifa, and had been placed in that in the vault, which is in the center room of the now 9 rooms. You know, the Guardian built the other 3 rooms when he had the work of cutting into the mountain to take away the mountain to get the other 3 rooms into that position, which was a request of Abdu'l-Baha. And so that casket was, that coffin